The commentators who talk about real estate across Australia tend to favour national factors like the level of interest rates as the prime movers of what happens in real estate markets across the country. I think they've got it wrong. Um, the the vast differences in markets across Australia, the contrasting fortunes, markets rising in some places, markets falling in others, markets falling a lot. A couple of our capital cities, Perth and Darwin, have had falling prices right throughout this lengthy period of record low interest rates. We think that factor is overrated. What we're interested in at Hotspotting is what's happening in local economies, because we believe that real estate markets essentially arise out of what's happening in the local economy. And tonight I want to talk about a market which is a great illustration of that factor, the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. I talked about it a couple of months ago in this Hotspot of the Week slot, but I want to talk about it again because I've just completed a special 30-page report which is entitled The Sunshine Coast, Australia's Most Compelling Growth Story. At Hotspotting, we research the entire nation. We're looking at, we're searching for growth markets across every town and suburb in the country, and every 3 months for the Price Predictor Index. We've just finished the spring edition of that report. We look at sales activity and price trends in every town and suburb in the country, trying to find the clues to tell us where the future growth markets are. And in every way we look at it, the Sunshine Coast is an outstanding market for people to consider. And one of the prime reasons for that is that the underlying economy is so dynamic and strong. Indeed, you could argue it's the strongest regional economy in Australia and stronger than some of our capital cities. It's certainly outspending 3 of our capital cities on infrastructure spending. So what's happening on the Sunshine Coast, I believe, is something of an economic revolution. It's transitioning from what used to be just a tourist town to what I regard now as an international city. And that rather massive transition, many of the events that have created that have fundamentally happened in the past 2 or 3 years. It's a process that's continuing, but very much underway. So we've done a comprehensive report called The Sunshine Coast, Australia's Most Compelling Growth Story. You can get a free copy of it if you go to the homepage of the hotspotting.com.au website. The economic revolution, as I call it, for the Sunshine Coast has essentially been created by the diversification of the economy. It used to be an economy that was almost solely reliant on tourism, which means a very fragile and vulnerable economy, but it's diversified and strengthened through creation of strong health, education and technology industries, amongst others, and through a massive program of spending on infrastructure. You add up everything that's recently completed, currently underway, or soon to begin on the Sunshine Coast. It's more than $20 billion of investment in infrastructure, and that's considerably more than Darwin's doing, considerably more than Hobart, also Hobart. So 3 of our capital cities are being greatly outspent by this dynamic regional city. Its economy has been measured as being worth $17.7 billion, one of the largest in regional Australia. And it's been creating jobs at a rate that puts it in the top 10 regions in the nation for employment generation. They've added more than 20,000 jobs in the past 5 years, and that's a process that's continuing. For example, the new University Hospital, which opened a couple of years ago, has created 5,000 jobs, and the new Maroochydore City Centre project, which is now getting underway, is forecast to create 15,000 jobs over the 15 or 20-year lifespan of creating that project, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the big changes in the economy, firstly, the $5 billion health precinct, still a work in progress, but the major component of it, the University Hospital, $2 billion just there, as well as the other things that have sprung up around it, like a private hospital and specialist medical. As I say, still a work in progress, a $5 billion precinct, but it's very much creating impetus in the local economy, and that's giving further impetus to the real estate market, particularly at the top end, because major medical facilities like that are bringing in new people to live and work on the Sunshine Coast. Many of them are well-paid people, and that's given uplift, particularly to the top end of the Sunshine Coast market. So we've seen the median house price for Noosa Heads, for example, increase 40% in the past 3 years, and in the last 12 months, the median apartment price in Noosa has increased 25% at a time when many of the major cities of Australia had prices going backwards. Now, in terms of it becoming what I call an international city, how do I justify that particular claim? Well, very soon the Sunshine Coast will have an international airport. The upgrade is currently happening. It will also have the international broadband network connection to Asia, the fastest internet connection from the east coast of Australia to anywhere in Asia. And this year, the Sunshine Coast was named in the top 7 intelligent communities of 2019. This is a global award that's given each year by the Intelligent Community Forum, which is a global organisation. The 7 finalists included cities like Chicago in the United States, but the Sunshine Coast was alongside Chicago. Taipei, I think, was also one of the top 7 finalists. So it's rubbing shoulders with pretty heavy hitters on a global basis, but it's an indication that's been recognised as an emerging international city. Indeed, noted demographer Bernard Salt, who many of you will know about, and perhaps read his columns in newspapers or read some of his books. He has described the Sunshine Coast recently as the entrepreneurship capital of Australia because of the large number of knowledge-based startups and small businesses such as information technology, clean tech, creative industries, aviation and education businesses that are happening there. So I've talked about the $5 billion health precinct. The other big ticket item that's coming up is the new Maroochydore CBD. They're creating a central business district for the Sunshine Coast from the ground up. A 53-hectare greenfield site. Used to be a golf course right there in the middle of Maroochydore, the most central of the suburbs of the Sunshine Coast coastal strip. The golf course has been relocated, and they're using that land to create a CBD. Work is well underway, but particularly in terms of the underlying infrastructure. But we're now seeing investment from local, national and international firms coming in to create what will eventually be a precinct of office buildings, residential towers, convention centre, hotels, etc., as well as cafes, restaurants and water features. So it's quite a substantial development, about a $5 billion undertaking over the next 15 or 20 years. It's well underway, and it's providing the nerve centre for everything that's happening on the Sunshine Coast at the moment, including the new upcoming international broadband network and the new soon to be created Sunshine Coast International Airport. So all of this is having a very major impact on real estate on the Sunshine Coast, and we're seeing considerable uplift in the last couple of years in terms of sales activity. And the latest edition of the Price Predict Index, we've just published that edition, the spring edition. The Sunshine Coast local government area has more suburbs with growing sales activity than any other LGA anywhere in Australia. And that's having an impact on prices. I mentioned some of the figures for Noosa. Other top-end suburbs have had pretty substantial growth in the last couple of years, and that's starting to ripple out right across the various suburbs and towns that are part of the Sunshine Coast region. So very much a dynamic transition economy, and out of that is coming a growth market. And taking a long-term view, we think the Sunshine Coast is one of the special places in Australia for investors to consider. It features strongly in the recent edition that we published of the National Top 10 Best Buys report. It's rated very highly in the new spring edition of our Price Predictor Index, and as I mentioned at the beginning, it's the subject of a special 30-page report which I've just completed called The Sunshine Coast, Australia's Most Compelling Growth Story. And as I said, you can go to the Hotspotting website, the homepage, and you can get yourself a free copy of that report. Okay, that's it for now. That's Hotspot of the Week for this week. Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au signing off. Let's talk again soon.